WMFD.com. It is Coffee Talk with Jay Fox, live from the Zoom studios in Ontario, Ohio, with sponsorship from the Cove Coffee Shop in downtown Ontario. Coffee Shop is an exclusive coffee shop, right? Coffee Talk is an exclusive service of WMFD TV News. I'm Jay Fox. Today we have on the program Ronele Myers, who is the SARN coordinator with Wyandotte and Crawford counties. That is the Sexual Assault Response Network. That's going to be our subject today. And Kristi, who is the program manager for the department covering Delaware, Morrow, Wyandotte, and Crawford counties. Good morning to both of you ladies.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It is my pleasure. Let's start by asking the tough question. The tough question is, why start by believing? That's the first thing on the website. It says start by believing. Why does that even need to be an issue?
Well, we start by believing because unfortunately so many survivors are afraid that they won't be believed. They're already in shock after what's happened. They don't understand what's just happened to them after the assault. But unfortunately, a lot of times survivors aren't believed, and we question survivors about what they did to provoke it. Maybe they're remembering it incorrectly. We tend to doubt survivors. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are maybe afraid that these horrible things happen, or that we're afraid to admit that somebody that we know and like and maybe love could do something like this.
Why would anyone make up a story about something so horrific?
You know what, most of them don't. Almost all of the stories are true. There's good science behind that.
So is it more the recipient of the story having a hard time conceptualizing that something like this could happen, or maybe just not wanting to deal with it, period?
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. That's twofold. It is something that's difficult for the folks involved with the survivor's life to, really want to believe that that is true, and also struggling to know how to provide that support moving forward.
Why would a victim choose to remain silent? Is the issue personal embarrassment? Is the issue, fear of repercussion? What are some of the issues that would cause a victim to not come forward?
I think part of what happens is that there are threats during the assault. If you tell anybody, I'm going to do A, B, or C to you. I also think part of it is, as a society, unfortunately, we blame victims for what happened to them. We often ask, well, were you drinking? Were you out alone? Did you not plan on this to happen? Did you not say no or fight back? And so we are taught this as, we grow and as we're in school and things. And so I think then we end up believing those things ourselves. Well, gosh, it's my fault. What did I do to make this happen? Maybe I didn't fight enough. Maybe I didn't do what I should have. And so, but they also see what happens in other cases. I mean, these cases are often televised and in the media, and we see how survivors are treated sometimes. And sometimes they go wonderfully and sometimes they don't. And it can be really hard for a survivor to come through or to come forward and want to go through that, to have their story told.
Most of the time when we hear these stories on the news, we hear stories about a younger woman who has been victimized, sometimes by a peer or an older man. Mm-hmm. And that's what we hear on the news, but that's not the whole story. The subject of sexual assault knows no gender, race, sexual orientation, or age boundaries. To what degree is it just a young lady's issue? Because I think that's a very common misconception.
So about 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted or raped in their lifetime. And right now it's about, the stats depend. Men are reluctant to come forward more often. It's harder for them to share their stories because of what we think of what masculinity should be, unfortunately. So the numbers are much closer, though, for men. Men are absolutely victims and survivors of sexual assault. We know that for kids, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18.
And that sexual abuse doesn't necessarily mean sexual abuse from the same sex. It could be from the opposite sex. So a man could be abused not only by a man, but also by a woman, and vice versa.
Yes. Yeah. This is a crime of power and control. It's not a crime of, it's not about sex. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It has everything to do with somebody who wants to harm somebody else, and this is how they've chosen to do it. They don't care about boundaries. They don't care about the person in front of them. And they do what they would like. We do know that that there are more vulnerable people. So people who have disabilities, whether they be physical or cognitive, are more likely to be sexually assaulted. We know that people who identify as LGBTQIA also have higher rates of sexual assault. People who have perceived vulnerabilities by the perpetrator are harmed more often because they know that these people may not be believed or their story might not be told.
Are the people who are the perpetrators often themselves victims from a prior time? So walk me through a scenario like that. Why would someone who was a victim choose to become a perpetrator? What's the psychology behind that?
I think it's very simple. I think it's the word you just said. I think it's choose. So many folks have been harmed in these ways, have been assaulted in these ways. However, a lot of us choose to move forward, right? And we heal and we work on recovery and we work on that for the rest of our lives. It's a horrible thing to go through. Perpetrators, they make different choices. Instead of recovery, they want that power, they want that control, and that's what they do. We're choosing how we live our lives.
Ronele, do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely agree with that statement. And if you're dealing with an individual that was brought upon them, there could be a whole lot of psychological factors that cause them to put that back out there in the world. And like Kristi said, it's a personal choice how you decide to move forward.
So what is the Sexual Assault Response Network and how did it get started?
Well, I can speak to that as an advocate. We provide a 24-hour information and referral crisis line. Our biggest goal is to be there in support of the survivor. So we have a lot of different things that we're out there doing in the communities. We support survivors at hospitals and with law enforcement agencies. We also provide workshops for sexual assault survivors, crisis intervention, healing workshops. We actually have a peer-run survivor support group that folks can be a part of, different annual retreats and trauma-informed support. So as an advocate, our main focus is to be here in complete support of the survivor as they're going through the full process.
What defines sexual assault? Because another common misperception is that it is rape by penetration, and that's not necessarily the whole subject matter.
It's defined as any type of unwanted sexual activity. And that can encompass a lot of things, a lot of different things. It's a crime of violence, power and control. Kristi, if you want to speak a little bit more to that on the definition.
Sure. So sexual assault is any type of unwanted sexual contact, basically. And so, you can think about folks who, maybe somebody reaches out and grabs them and those kinds of things, all the way up to rape is another classification. So rape is penetration, but it's penetration in various ways. So there's a whole gamut that sexual assault can be. Sexual assault isn't just rape. There's a lot more types of assault that happen.
This is going to be a strange question.
Sure.
But how does the victim know they've been assaulted? Do you understand why I'm asking that question?
That is a wonderful question. And let me tell you, we get so many calls and folks asking us, how do I know if I've been assaulted? And again, it kind of goes back to what we've been taught, you know, as we grow up and what we're talking about relationships and sexuality. My baseline is always this. We all have boundaries, right? And if I've said no, or if I've indicated no, if I haven't said yes, and this person does it anyway, whatever it may be, that's an assault. That's blowing past my boundaries. They haven't heard me. They haven't cared about what I've said, and they've touched me in ways that I didn't want them to do.
So what happens if the answer in the first half is yes, and then it suddenly becomes no, which could occur?
And it does occur. It really does. We are human beings. We change our minds all the time, or, you know, we start to recognize, oh, maybe something's not right here. Most folks will hear a no and say, okay, you know what, you're right. Let's slow it down. Let's take some space. I understand. People who are not going to hear that are people who are going to sexually assault somebody.
Is there a way for the individual to protect themselves in advance? What type of knowledge and what type of programs are available to raise the issue of cognizance so that we're not all potential victims? Is that a thing?
The way that we look at it is, we've talked a lot for decades about how to prevent rape happening to you.
Right. Because I mean, when my daughter went to college, and the reason I asked this question is because I have two daughters. And the first thing I did when my daughter went to college is I bought her the pepper spray to put on her keychain and the whistle to put on her keychain. Because now she's at the University of Kansas. She's in an area where she doesn't know anyone. This is all new. Now, I'm not suggesting that she's walking around as a potential victim, but I wanted to give her some tools to make her feel safer. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. So the way that we look at preventing sexual assault as we want to change our communities to be places where somebody is held accountable, so that we can, instead of laughing at a sexual assault joke, we say, whoa, that's about a lot of violence that I'm not comfortable with. Talking about ways to stay safer, unfortunately, we know that if you have to use pepper spray, that means there's already an assault happening.
Okay.
You know, and so there are ways to be safer, but in the end, it either means that this person finds another target, or it happens anyway, unfortunately. And so to stop rape, to prevent rape, is to change how we hold people accountable and how we teach our kids and teach ourselves about, you know, what we call rape culture, basically.
So it's not only protecting yourself, but it's also identifying what not to do as a potential perpetrator.
Exactly.
Right. So it's a reinforcement of core values.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay. All right. So there's a huge difference between the populations of Delaware, Morrill, Wyandotte, and Crawford County, both in terms of demographics, in terms of age, in terms of education. To what degree do you modify your program in each of these counties to account for the population differences?
I mean, I'm going to speak to that as being from the smaller county, Wyandotte and Crawford. We go forward looking at this from the same aspect. We provide the same services. You know, we're lucky in these smaller counties to be able to build relationships with the hospitals, with law enforcement, which is also being done in Delaware and Morrow counties. But I can speak to the fact that there is something to be said in these smaller communities. We can really thrive on building those relationships and getting our information out there in ways like joining you this morning to let people know that we are available. So when they're ready to speak up and start that journey, we're here for them. And I do feel as an agency across the board, we follow the same steps and the same structure because you know, everyone's journey is going to be different. So we approach it all in the same way. And it's a very personal situation for each survivor that we're working with.
One of the biggest issues with surviving a sexual assault or a sexual trauma is feeling that you can't get past it and having suicidal ideation associated with the feeling that you can't get past it. What are some of the treatment modalities that are employed to deal with those feelings of self-worth and helplessness?
You know, again, we are in a position to assist individuals with linking to whatever wraparound services they need in that community. So as we build our partnerships through Helpline and our SARN program, we can let them know what's available so they can make those choices to move forward in different avenues, whether that be counseling or joining a support group or different things like that. So we just make sure that we have the knowledge of what resources are available so we can share all of that with anyone who might be wanting to take steps forward. Also, moving in a different direction of the conversation, we have our hotline, which also serves consumers 24/7. We are able to speak to any individual that wants to call in and just have a listening ear, or if they're looking for a specific resource, that information can be provided so that they can make that decision. But as a whole, our agency is looking at suicide prevention and also, you know, getting out into the school systems and talking to folks at a very early age to let them know the support the community and these agencies like ours are providing for them.
Is that Helpline? Is that an anonymous call?
It can be.
It can
if that's
be.
what they choose. Yes, absolutely.
Right, because some people will not choose that action step if their name is associated with it until they're ready.
Exactly. And they can provide whatever information they would like to provide. And we are keeping all that information confidential between our agency. So it really is a safe avenue for someone to call and at least get that conversation started and make some decisions about what direction and what support they're going to need moving forward.
And it's important what you said about having access to resources. I sit on the Know It Before You Need It board here in Richland County. And
Wonderful.
one of the things that, thank you, we're very pleased with how that's worked out. The concept behind it was having a one-stop shop for resources for every possible avenue that an individual might need help. And what really brought this to the forefront was COVID and being isolated at the home and dealing with issues that, you know, perhaps were not dealt with before or suddenly surfaced as a result of that isolation. How has COVID impacted the Sexual Assault Response Network, which you referred to as SARN?
So we have taken our services. We are no longer responding in person to hospitals or to law enforcement. So after an assault has happened, folks can report to police, or they can go to hospital and get an exam done and just get checked out medically. We no longer go in person. What we've been doing for the last several months are phone calls with folks before or after the exam. We're going to be doing video advocacy. So we're actually going to do a Zoom call with survivors who are reporting either to the police or who are going to the hospital. We've always done advocacy over the phone, so that much hasn't changed. We just are no longer seeing people in person at this time, but we'll be getting the video conferencing up and going soon.
Have you noticed those conversations are easier, not in person, or more difficult?
The hospital and the law enforcement, it's more difficult because when we're responding to the immediate crisis, when folks are in shock, when they are just, the trauma is fully hitting them about what's just happened to them, it can be more difficult, which is why we're switching to the video advocacy.
Sure.
In hopes that we can keep our staff and our volunteers, safe, medically safe, but also keep the survivors safe, but also be able to interact with them, read body language, understand what they may be going through, because so much is said with just body language.
Absolutely.
And, so those are the changes that we're looking forward to making to improve services again.
If someone has gone through a trauma and they perceive themselves to be at risk for further trauma, are there safe house services associated with the program?
We do not do house. So our hotline is a great resource. They also do suicide screening as well, but they're a great resource for housing. So we would refer them to hotline, or if it's a situation where it's an intimate partner who has, been perpetrating sexual assault, then we refer them to Turning Point. Turning Point is a domestic violence agency and shelter, and they serve so many counties, but they serve our core 4 counties as well.
So how are you guys funded? Are you federally, state, county, or donation-based?
The SARN department, we are funded federally and state. And so government matters to us, and so that's where we get all of our funding to keep us going. Yeah, we're a nonprofit. We rely on funding and donations.
So when we talk about donations, what do you need?
Well, we always need money to do more services. Okay. There are still counties in Central Ohio and in North Central Ohio that don't have any rape crisis services. And so, go ahead.
Speaking outside of the funding piece, one of the other items that really keeps us going is participation from volunteers. And so reaching out to the community, that's going to be something else that we're very interested in giving some credence to. We need volunteers to assist us in all different kinds of avenues, but to go through a training process to learn how to also advocate for survivors. We have a nice group of volunteers. We can always use more. And if anyone is out there currently looking for a way to give back to the community, again, we are currently doing everything from a distance. The phone calls and the video advocacy will be coming. So we can attest to that being a safe way to volunteer because we're going to provide that volunteer with all of the resources that they're going to need. And they can do that from a safe space and still be able to help the community. So
let's clarify what you mean by advocate for victims. Because when you hear a phrase like that, you think of, marching to Washington, D.C. and, testifying before Congress. That's not what you mean by advocating. What do they specifically have to do?
So we would call that activism. Marching to Washington is activism. Okay. And right. Honestly, it's a common thing. So advocacy is being that supportive person who walks through the process with a survivor, whatever their process may look like.
Right. So they're like an ombudsman,
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of. Yeah. And so it's more like if whatever the survivor needs, whatever resources, or if they need a listening ear, we're the ones who do that. We connect them. If they do want to report to police, we walk through that whole process with them. If they don't, we get them, connected to our support groups, get them connected to our events, get them connected to counseling and things. For hospital advocacy, we, again, and this is hopefully whenever the pandemic is over, we actually go to the hospital in those moments of crisis, and we stay with people during the exams to provide that emotional support on site. And the same thing with law enforcement. So if they're reporting to police, we will go along on that interview with them. And we are a small staff, but our group of volunteers is what keeps us going.
And I would imagine that you need diversity among your advocates.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because,
we serve everybody.
Well, right. And sometimes people like to, or feel more comfortable dealing with certain people of their choice.
Yep.
It's not an easy thing to talk about.
Absolutely.
If
You're
you
right.
don't feel comfortable talking to the person who is your quote unquote advocate, you're not going to talk. And then the help can't begin. So that's why we start by believing, but we also have to start by listening and by talking. And it makes a difference. So we know about the 211 system, which has been a godsend. But what is the actual number, and what is the website associated with the program?
Our 1-800 number is going to be 1-800-684-2324.
Say it one more time. Say it one more time.
1-800-684-2324.
See, and then we always say it 3 times to make sure. So that's 1-800-684-2324.
Correct. And that's available 24/7 for support and information.
Okay. And what is the website, please?
It's Helpline Delaware, or helpline.org. Okay. Now, if you Google Helpline, you're going to come up with the statewide sexual assault website as well. But it's Helpline in Delaware, Morrow, Crawford, Wyandotte counties.
Terrific. Kristi Timbrook is the program manager for the SARN department for Delaware, Morrow, Wyandotte, and Crawford County. Ronele Myers is the SARN coordinator for Wyandotte and Crawford County. They've been our guests this morning on Coffee Talk. Our subject has been the Sexual Assault Response Network, and we thank you for this vital information for our community. You have been watching Coffee Talk. It is a service of WMFD TV News. It is available exclusively on WMFD.com and is sponsored in part by the Cove Coffee Shop in Ontario, Ohio. I'm Jay Fox. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.